All right, so are you ready for this? We are diving deep today into an interview with JD Vance.
Oh, yeah, this should be good. JD Vance, the Republican nominee for vice president.
You know him.
I do.
And this isn't just any little interview, right? This is the marathon, the one.
The Joe Rogan Experience.
Joe Rogan Experience.
It goes on forever.
Hours and hours and hours. So.
Buckle up.
Yeah, buckle up. We're going to unpack some of the good stuff.
Yeah, we're going to give you the highlights.
Vance, he doesn't hold back. Let's just be upfront about that. He's known for...
Oh, yeah, outspoken.
Outspoken, yeah. So, we're going to encounter some controversial stuff today. But our goal here isn't to...
Not to tell you what to think.
Just to lay it out there?
Exactly.
Like what he said.
What he actually said.
Yeah.
Well, you could decide. So let's start with Vance's path to the VP nomination.
How to get there.
Yeah, because it's not every day.
40-year-old senator?
Yeah. It's not a typical story.
No.
And he actually shares some pretty interesting behind-the-scenes details about conversations with Trump, like the Mar-a-Lago gardener. Remember that?
Yeah, Trump was talking about Vance with the gardener at Mar-a-Lago.
I mean, come on.
And Vance had no idea that any of this was happening.
He finds out later.
Yeah. It's like, this is how the world works, just these...
Behind the scenes.
Crazy, yeah. And then...
What about that rally where someone fired a gun?
Oh, yeah. Aiming for Trump.
And Vance's reaction.
I mean, Vance is a gun owner himself, and he was really shaken by that.
Oh, yeah?
He said he went home and loaded all of his guns.
Oh, wow.
Because he was really, really scared.
Yeah.
For his safety, so...
And that really highlights kind of what's going on these days, these heightened tensions around politics and...
Yeah, it makes you think about this quick rise of Vance's. Is this a trend?
It makes you wonder.
Yeah.
In American politics.
Are we seeing a shift toward candidates that are just less polished, more outspoken?
More raw, more real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's get into some of his opinions. Let's talk about wokeism. So Vance makes this really interesting argument that wokeism is functioning.
Like a religion?
Like a religion.
Yeah.
He sees these parallels between how people follow woke ideology.
The rituals, the creeds. You can't question it.
Yeah, and he even brings up those signs.
Oh, I know what you're going to say.
In this house we believe.
Yes. You see them everywhere.
It's like this trend of framing...
Social justice.
Yeah, social justice in these religious
terms.
Religious terms. He talked about this article that was comparing...
Gay rights advocacy.
Gay rights advocacy to religious rights.
Interesting.
Which is, I mean, it's a...
Provocative.
It's provocative, but his point is that wokeism has taken on this really moralistic tone.
It can be alienating.
Yeah. If you don't agree, then you're bad. And he even tells this story about a friend of his.
Oh, in Austin.
Austin, yeah, who was just like, I just want to be left alone.
Leave me alone.
I don't want to have to signal my virtue all the time.
Right. Isn't that what we all want sometimes? Mm-hmm. So it really makes you think, does framing these social movements in this way help us understand it?
Yeah.
Or does it just lead to more division?
Yeah.
I don't know.
All right, well, let's move on. Let's talk about Vance's, he's especially critical of the transgender movement.
Yeah, he does not hold back.
Particularly when it comes to medical interventions for children. He's very, very strongly opinionated on this stuff.
Puberty blockers, hormone therapy, even surgery.
Yeah, on minors.
Yeah.
Who identify as transgender?
It's a big decision.
He sees these interventions as...
potentially irreversible.
Yeah, harmful. Especially since gender identity can be so fluid,
Especially in adolescence.
And he's also concerned about biological males competing in women's sports.
Oh, yeah, that's a hot button issue for sure.
And he says it creates an unfair playing field.
Makes sense.
He even shares this story. It's a little graphic, but...
Go up.
But he's talking about a constituent who was flashed by a man wearing a miniskirt in New York City. Yeah. And she was really uncomfortable. And he uses this to illustrate his concern about the erosion of traditional gender roles. But
it's sensitive, right?
It's a sensitive topic.
It raises questions about individual expression and societal norms.
Yeah.
It's tricky.
It's a really, really tricky topic. Now, Vance throws some curveballs when it comes to environmentalism.
He's not afraid to go against the grain.
Yeah. He critiques both the left and the right.
What?
Yeah.
On environmentalism.
Yeah. For what he sees as their misguided approaches.
All right, break it down for me.
So on the right, he sees this obsession with carbon footprint.
As the metric.
And it's like, what about other concerns like obesity or the lack of time people spend?
Outdoors,
yeah. And then on the left, he points to what he calls hypocrisy, with the East Palestine train derailment.
Oh, yeah, that was a major environmental disaster.
Major in Ohio.
Chemical contamination everywhere. So what's he saying about that?
So he's criticizing the Biden administration for not supporting the community enough, and he's saying they're pushing these green energy initiatives in Europe while kind of ignoring the immediate needs.
Yeah. Of the people who are suffering.
I'm Americans, yeah, in East Palestine.
It's like they're looking over there.
Yeah.
And not right here.
And he talks about trying to get funding for long-term health studies.
Oh, so he actually tried to do something about it.
Yes,
And
but the Biden administration wasn't interested.
interesting. So he thinks we're distracted by the wrong things.
Yeah, he calls them fake environmental issues.
Fake versus real.
Yeah, and so it really makes you think, like, what do you consider to be...
The most pressing problem.
Yeah, the real problem.
That's a good question.
Yeah. And Vance, he gets into his concerns about big pharma and big tech.
Those are some big players.
Yeah. He criticizes the direct-to-consumer advertising of pharmaceuticals.
Oh, those commercials, yeah.
And he says it leads to...
Over-medication.
Yeah, over-medication. And that disconnect between patients and doctors...
And then there's social media.
Oh, yeah. He's really concerned about social media.
Suppressing information. Things that don't fit the mainstream narrative.
Exactly. And you're not going to believe this, but he shares this crazy story about a pharmaceutical lobbyist he met who...
Humpy-doo.
He quit his job because he was disgusted
Discuss.
by a scheme his company was running involving opioids and Native American tribes.
Boy.
Apparently, they were exploiting their sovereign status to shield themselves from lawsuits.
Oh, wow. That's a whole other level.
It's pretty shocking.
Yeah.
It really is.
So you're telling me they were basically taking advantage of these communities
Vulnerable communities
to make money.
to protect their profits.
That's disturbing.
Yeah. So it makes you question, are corporations really being held accountable enough for the bad stuff?
Right, because who ends up paying the price?
Yeah.
The communities, the people.
Exactly. All right, well, let's take a quick break.
Okay.
And then we come back, we'll dive into Vance's views on election integrity, Kamala Harris.
And some hot button issues.
Stay with us.
So before the break, we were talking about JD Vance and his, pretty serious concerns about corporate influence and how the media portrays all that.
It's a lot to think about.
Yeah.
It really is. And it makes you wonder, who can you trust these days?
Right. With all this information flying around.
Exactly. And speaking of trust, Vance, well, he doesn't hold back when it comes to the media's coverage of election integrity.
Yeah, this is a big one for him.
He thinks they downplay or just completely ignore evidence that goes against the mainstream narrative.
Especially when it comes to Trump.
Especially when it comes to Trump.
Okay, so give me an example.
He brings up the Hunter Biden laptop story.
Ah, yes, the laptop.
You remember that?
Of course.
This was just before the 2020 election.
Right.
And it was this laptop allegedly belonging to Hunter Biden,
The president's son.
the president's son. And it supposedly had all this damaging information about his business dealings.
Right.
And the controversy is really about how the story was handled.
By the media.
By the media, by social media.
Everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of outlets, they just dismissed it as Russian disinformation.
Fake news.
Right.
Yeah.
And social media companies like Twitter and Facebook, they limited how much it could spread.
They didn't want people talking about it.
And Vance sees this as a straight-up attempt to suppress information that could have hurt Biden's chances.
So it's like they were trying to protect him.
Potentially. And it's interesting because even Mark Zuckerberg admitted...
Oh, wow. Zuckerberg himself.
Yeah, he admitted that the FBI contacted Facebook about the story.
What'd they say?
And they warned them about potential Russian propaganda.
Yeah.
So these concerns about suppression...
You weren't just coming out of nowhere.
No.
This is real.
Yeah. And Vance says the timing of it all, so close to the election,
Right.
it raises question.
Of their motivations.
Yeah, exactly. So he makes this distinction between what he calls honest media, like Joe Rogan,
Ooh.
Joe Rogan's podcast.
Okay, so he's honest?
He sees him as honest
Okay.
versus the corporate media,
So corporate media is not honest.
which he says is
Biased.
bias,
Controlled by
special interest.
special interests.
Mm-hmm.
And political agendas. He sees Rogan, even though he's a comedian.
A comedian.
Yeah, as providing this more balanced platform.
He's not afraid to have the tough conversations.
Yeah. Challenge the status quo.
And it's interesting.
It's a really interesting comparison.
Yeah, because it really speaks to this larger distrust
Yeah.
that a lot of people feel
Of the mainstream media.
that the news is biased.
Yeah.
It doesn't represent them.
Doesn't represent their views. So this raises some really important questions for all of us. Like, how do you even navigate the news these days?
Right. What do you trust?
Yeah.
Who do you believe?
What sources are actually credible? It's a lot.
It's so hard to know.
And it's especially tricky.
With all the polarization.
Yeah. Now, let's move on to Vance's take on Kamala Harris and censorship. Well, this should be good.
He really hones in on this incident where Biden called Trump supporters...
What do you call them?
Garbage.
Garbage during a speech?
Yeah. And Vance compares this to how the media reacted when comedians said similar things.
Even worse sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And his point is there's this double standard
Absolutely.
when it comes to what's acceptable to say.
It depends who you are.
Yeah.
And what side you're on.
Exactly. So he's saying that the media is quick to jump on certain types of speech, but they give a pass to others.
If it fits their agenda.
Exactly. And so this leads to this bigger question about freedom of speech, right?
Right.
Are we too sensitive as a society these days?
Can't we take a joke anymore?
Yeah. Are we losing our ability to have conversations without getting offended and calling for censorship?
Or are these concerns valid?
Yeah.
About people in power trying to silence us?
It's a tough balance. And then Vance throws this curveball. He suggests that Harris might be pushing for expanded voting rights for undocumented immigrants.
To help a Democrat?
Yeah, to secure more votes for the Democratic Party.
Interesting.
It's a bold claim, and it sparked a lot of debate.
Of course.
He argues that this could really impact election outcomes.
Change the results.
Yeah, and he's concerned that it could undermine the whole democratic process.
And this feeds into that whole narrative on the right about whether our elections are even fair.
Right, whether certain groups are getting an advantage.
It's a really complex issue.
With a lot of different perspectives.
It ties into this sense of unease.
That a lot of Americans feel.
Yeah.
About the state of our democracy.
Yeah. Are these fears about election integrity?
About manipulation?
Are they justified?
Or are they being used for political gain?
That's the question, right? And you really have to consider all sides.
Absolutely.
And be critical of the information you're seeing.
Think for yourself.
Yeah. Now, before we get into those really hot-button issues, he talks about something that I found really interesting.
What's that?
He talks about the decline of social trust in America.
Like, we don't trust each other.
Yeah, and he's not just talking about trust in the government or institutions.
Okay.
But trust in each other, like as citizens.
Wow.
And he thinks this is really, really bad.
Bad for society.
Yeah. Bad for the fabric of our society.
Interesting.
And he blames social media.
Ah, social media. Always the culprit.
Because it amplifies outrage and division.
Misinformation? Yeah.
It's so easy to get stuck in these echo chambers.
Where you only see what you already agree with.
Yeah.
It's true.
And then it makes it so hard to talk to people who
think differently.
Yeah. So it makes you wonder, has social media made it harder for you to connect with people who have different views?
That's a good question.
Yeah. And if so, like, how do we fix it? How do we build trust again? It's a big challenge.
Especially these days, everything feels so
divided.
Yeah.
Polarized. And speaking of which,
speaking of polarization,
Vance tackles some of the most divisive topics out there.
He does not shy away. Abortion, psychedelics,
and gun control.
Ooh.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's take these one at a time.
Okay.
So abortion, where does Vance land on that?
He seems to align with the more conservative side of the Republican Party.
Okay.
He thinks the issue should be left to the states.
States' rights.
Yeah, not the federal government.
So no nationwide laws?
No nationwide laws.
Okay. What's his reasoning there?
He says this approach, it reflects the different views on abortion across the country.
Right, different states have different opinions?
Exactly, and he even compares it to Europe,
right,
which he sees as having this more democratic...
less polarized.
Yeah, less polarized way of dealing with it.
Interesting.
He admits that this stance,
it might not be popular with everyone?
Yeah, not everyone in the Republican Party agrees with him, but he thinks it's the most pragmatic way forward.
So he's trying to find that middle ground.
Yeah, on a really tough issue. A sensitive issue. Now, psychedelics...
This should be interesting.
He's surprisingly open-minded.
Really?
Yeah.
I wouldn't have guessed that.
Yeah. Especially when it comes to veterans and the potential therapeutic benefits.
For things like PTSD?
Yeah. He talks about knowing veterans who've had really good experiences.
With psychedelic therapy?
With psychedelic therapy.
Wow. Okay, so what's stopping them?
He mentions the FDA.
The FDA.
And he's frustrated with how slow they are.
With approving treatments.
Yeah. He points out that psychedelics are currently Schedule R drugs.
Which means?
Which means the government says they have no accepted medical use and are highly addictive.
So it's hard to even study them, let alone use them as medicine.
Exactly. It makes it almost impossible to do research.
And to actually help people who might benefit.
And he makes a really interesting point.
Go on.
About how hard it is to study these things using traditional scientific methods. Because, like, you know how they do those double-blind, placebo-controlled studies? Those are like the gold standard.
For FDA approval.
Yeah, but it's really difficult to do that with psychedelics because the effects are so obvious.
Right. You can't really hide it from people.
Yeah.
So it's like we need a new approach.
Yeah.
A new way to study these things.
So he seems to be advocating for a more nuanced approach to drug policy.
One that considers the benefits.
Especially for mental health.
That's interesting. It's not your typical conservative viewpoint.
No.
Okay, let's move on. Gun control. What does Vance have to say about that?
He's pretty straightforward on this.
Oh,
he thinks we should focus on mental health.
Not on the guns themselves.
Right. He argues that there are just too many guns already out there.
Right.
So gun control measures.
They're not going to work.
Not really.
Okay. I mean, that makes sense. It's like trying to close the barn door after the horse is bolted.
Exactly. He thinks that even if you could somehow magically confiscate every single gun in America.
Which is impossible.
Yeah.
Pretty much.
It's pretty much impossible.
Yeah.
He says people who want to do bad things.
They'll find a way.
They'll find a way.
Doesn't have to be a gun.
Yeah. And he challenges that statistic.
But you know the one?
That countries with stricter gun control have less gun violence.
Right. What about that?
He says it's not that simple. He uses Finland as an example.
Finland?
Yeah. They have a lot of guns.
Okay.
But not a lot of gun violence.
Interesting.
Yeah. He says we need to look at other factors.
Right.
Like culture, mental health care, socioeconomic conditions.
So more complicated than just counting guns.
Right. And then he brings up this really controversial point.
Okay, I'm listening.
He suggests that there might be a link.
Between what?
Between certain psychiatric medications.
Okay.
Like SSRIs.
And mass shootings.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And a lot of people are skeptical about this.
I can imagine.
But he thinks it's worth looking into.
So it's like he's saying we need to understand the root causes.
Yeah. Not just jump to conclusions.
It's a complex issue.
Yeah. So his approach is very different from what you hear from a lot of people on the left.
He's not talking about bans or anything like that.
Yeah.
He wants to address the underlying problems.
Yeah. It's a different perspective.
It's worth thinking about, for sure.
And it reminds us that there are a lot of different viewpoints on these tough issues.
And we need to listen to all of them.
All right, well, let's take another quick pause.
Okay.
When we come back, we'll get into Vance's vision for the future and what he thinks needs to change in America.
Stay tuned. All right, so we're back. And we've really gone deep with JD Vance.
We have.
His background, what he believes in.
His opinions on all kinds of stuff.
Wokeism, the environment. Now let's talk about his vision for America.
What does he see for the future?
Yeah, because he keeps saying that Americans are, they're ready for something different.
Yeah. Tired of the same old, same old.
The games. He thinks they want a leader who'll shake things up.
Get stuff done.
And he sees Trump's success as proof that people are unhappy with, the establishment.
The way things are.
Exactly. And he says the Republican Party needs to tap into that.
But also offer solutions.
Right. Not just complain. What are you going to do about it?
He's pretty critical of what he calls the elites.
Oh, yeah.
He thinks they're obsessed with all these abstract ideas and social issues.
And they're out of touch.
Yeah.
With, working class people.
The everyday struggle.
Jobs, cost of living.
The real stuff.
Exactly.
And he keeps saying we need to regain the trust.
Of the people who feel left behind.
Yeah. By the system.
Like, he points to immigration.
The opioid crisis.
Manufacturing jobs going overseas.
Yeah, all that stuff.
And he says the government's failed in these areas.
Not delivering for the people.
It's almost like he's trying to combine things.
Yeah.
That Trump energy.
That anti-establishment.
But with actual policies.
Yeah.
Concrete solutions.
Yeah, he's not just saying drain the swamp.
He's saying, okay, here's how we rebuild it.
Yeah. And he even thinks there's common ground to be found on some of those hot button issues.
Really?
Yeah.
Like abortion, gun control.
Yeah, if we can just get past the yelling,
And the fighting.
the drama.
So what would that look like?
Well, like with abortion, he proposes a federalist approach.
Okay, so leave it to the states.
Let each state decide.
That'll calm things down.
Yeah, allow for more local control.
Because different states have different values.
Exactly.
It's,
And on gun control,
yeah.
he wants to focus on mental health.
Instead of just taking away guns.
Yeah, get to the root of the problem.
Makes sense.
So it seems like Vance's vision for America is really about getting back to basics.
Common sense.
Yeah, common sense governing,
Leaders who care about everyday people.
not special interests.
And not just talking the talk, but actually fixing things.
Yeah, a
Yeah.
government that actually works for the people.
That we can trust.
And that brings us back to something Vance said
Okay.
about Americans wanting something different in 2024.
Different. But what does that actually mean?
Yeah, what does different really look like? Is it just about changing policies?
Or is it bigger than that?
Yeah, like, do we need to change the whole political culture?
Can we even talk to each other anymore?
Yeah, without all the anger,
The division.
the fighting.
These are big questions.
And I think they're questions we all need to think about as we head into this next election.
It's not just about picking a candidate
It's about what kind of country we want.
and what kind of future we're building.
So we've covered a lot today with JD Vance.
We have
His life, his views.
the good, the bad, the controversial.
Now it's up to you to decide what you think.
Go do your own research.
Start conversations.
Ask questions.
And don't be afraid to really think critically about all of this.
Yeah, challenge your own assumptions.
That's how we become more informed
More engaged.
and hopefully create a better future together.
Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive. We'll see you next time.